feel like you're constantly trying to like cram more information into your brain.
Yeah.
But then you end up feeling less sharp, kind of. Like you've got the degrees and the fancy resume and all that, but then you can't even remember where you left your keys.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly the kind of paradox that we're diving into today with this fictional story called The School of Unlearning.
Okay, sounds interesting. It's like we're going to explore this whole side of learning that nobody really wants to talk about.
Exactly. And in this story, we're following this guy, Henry, who's like the classic overachiever. You know, he's climbed the corporate ladder, has all the outward signs of success, but then he starts to feel kind of, well, for lack of a better word, dumb.
Wow.
And it starts subtly, like he's forgetting simple words, feeling this mental fog kind of thing. Those moments we all have, right?
Totally.
But for Henry, it becomes this nagging feeling that something is seriously off.
That's really interesting. You know, it's so fascinating about that. It's like Henry's experience really taps into this deep fear that I think a lot of us have, that even though we're achieving all these things, we might actually be losing ourselves in the process. And in psychology, there's a name for this feeling of mental overload. It's called cognitive overload. It's like our brains are being bombarded with so much information that they literally can't process it all. And then our clarity starts to suffer.
Yeah. And that's what makes this story so relatable, right? I mean, who hasn't felt that sense of overwhelm in this crazy, fast-paced world? But going back to Henry's story, there's this really poignant scene where he's hanging out with his friend Jill, and they both kind of admit to each other this unspoken feeling of being dulled down by their education and careers. It's like all those years of striving for success have somehow left them feeling empty, intellectually empty, you know.
Yeah. It's such a powerful illustration of how standardized learning, while important in many ways, can sometimes come with a hidden cost. Because when we put so much emphasis on memorizing facts and figures, getting the right answer, it can actually end up stifling our natural curiosity and creativity.
Yeah, it's like we trade in our natural curiosity for this like the correctness of the textbook answer.
Yeah.
And in Henry's case, this realization hits him like a ton of bricks during this big presentation at work. He just stops mid-speech and asks his colleagues, does any of this even matter? What's the point of what we're doing here?
Oh, wow. I felt that. It's like he's calling out this emptiness of corporate jargon and this endless pursuit of metrics without any real meaning. Psychologists actually have a term for this going through the motions feeling. It's called learned helplessness. Have you ever felt that? Like that feeling of being stuck on autopilot? Like you're just going through the motions at work or even in like a relationship? That's exactly it. We become so conditioned to external validation. The grades, the promotions, the likes on social media, that we totally lose sight of our own internal compass.
And for Henry, this is a major turning point. Instead of just ignoring this nagging feeling, he actually listens to it. He quits his job, walks away from the very thing he was taught to strive for his entire life.
I mean, that's a bold move, right? To just walk away from everything you've worked for. But it reflects this deep yearning for something more authentic. Like he's recognizing that true intelligence isn't about racking up credentials and achievements. It's about connecting with something deeper, something intrinsically meaningful.
It's like he's unlearning everything he thought he knew about success and fulfillment.
Totally.
So what does he do? He dives headfirst into reading for pleasure, taking long walks, just letting his mind wander. It's like he's reteaching himself how to think for himself.
And this is where Henry's journey gets really interesting, because it connects to this whole concept of growth mindset. Instead of seeing intelligence as this fixed thing that we're born with, Henry starts to embrace the idea that our minds are like muscles. The more we challenge them, the more they grow. Think about a time you were intimidated to learn something new, maybe coding or playing an instrument or something.
Yeah.
A growth mindset encourages us to approach those challenges with excitement, knowing that our abilities are not set in stone.
So instead of seeing learning as something you do in school or on the job, it becomes this lifelong pursuit.
Right.
Like Henry's not just trying to get to the right answer anymore. He's actually enjoying the process of exploration and discovery.
Exactly. He's shifting from this focus on knowing to a love of learning.
But here's the thing. A year later, Henry bumps into his old friend Jill, the one who was feeling similarly stuck. And guess what?
What's that?
She's still grinding away at her job, feeling just as intellectually drained as before.
Oh, no.
I know. It's like you can't just unlearn all the negative thought patterns and societal pressures overnight. They're constantly there, tempting us to fall back into old habits.
That's so true. Those pressures to conform, to prioritize efficiency over genuine understanding, they're relentless. It really does require a conscious effort, like a constant vigilance, to maintain that sense of curiosity and resist those old patterns of passive learning.
Okay, so we're talking about constantly challenging our assumptions, but what does that actually look like in practice? How do we go about unlearning things we've spent years, maybe even our whole lives being taught?
That's where things get really interesting.
It's like this whole idea of unlearning. It's not just about escaping the 9 to 5 grind. It's like it has these bigger implications for all areas of our lives, right?
Absolutely. You know what Henry's story really highlights is how often we cling to these outdated beliefs or habits in like every area of our lives just because they're familiar. Or we shy away from real intellectual exploration because it's so much easier to just scroll on our phones and passively consume information.
It's almost like our brains are like hardwired to categorize everything, right? And if something doesn't fit neatly into one of those pre-existing boxes, we either try to like cram it in there or we just dismiss it altogether.
That's such a great way to put it. We become so attached to our current understanding of the world that we resist any new information that challenges those beliefs. It's like we've built these mental fortresses around ourselves. And anything that threatens our worldview is met with like this huge resistance.
And that resistance, that fear of being wrong or looking foolish, it can be so paralyzing, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. It prevents us from experiencing the world with any sense of openness or wonder. But you know what Henry's story really shows us? It's the power of embracing that discomfort, of approaching learning with a beginner's mind.
So instead of clinging to the safety of what we think we know, we need to lean into the unknown, even if it means questioning everything we thought was true.
Exactly. Because true growth happens when we're willing to let go of those rigid beliefs and embrace the possibility of being wrong.
It reminds me of that quote, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing."
Yes. It's about approaching life as this continuous learning process with humility and a genuine desire to understand, even if it means challenging your own deeply held beliefs.
And this applies to our relationships too, don't you think? Like we bring so much baggage and all these preconceived notions to our interactions with others.
Oh, 100%. Think about how often conflicts come up just from our unwillingness to see things from another person's perspective.
Yeah.
Or how we stay stuck in these unhealthy patterns because we're terrified to challenge the status quo.
It's like we're running on these outdated scripts, just replaying the same dynamics over and over without even realizing it.
Right. And that's where unlearning can be so incredibly liberating in our relationships. It allows us to actually examine those ingrained patterns, to communicate more authentically, and to build stronger, healthier connections.
So it's about recognizing those moments when we're stuck in those old habits
Uh,
or reacting based on past hurts instead of responding to the present moment.
exactly. It's about asking ourselves, is this belief about this person still true? Is this way of communicating actually serving both of us?
So we need to become more aware of our own internal biases and assumptions, those things we might not even realize are influencing how we interact with others.
And that's not always easy. Unlearning those ingrained patterns takes real effort and self-reflection. But the rewards, in terms of personal growth and more fulfilling relationships, they're so worth it.
I mean, it's like anything else we want to improve, right? It takes practice and a willingness to be honest with ourselves about the areas where we might be holding ourselves back.
You got it. It's a continuous journey of self-discovery and growth.
So we've talked about unlearning in the context of work and relationships, but what about our own personal growth? What are some practical things we can do, to apply this idea of unlearning, to actually become more adaptable and well-rounded people?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's something that Henry grapples with, too, in the story. He realizes that unlearning isn't just about shedding outdated beliefs. It's also about, it's like he realizes that unlearning isn't just about getting rid of those old beliefs. It's also about actively trying to cultivate new ways of thinking and being.
So it's not enough to just clear out all the clutter. We have to actually replace it with something more functional, more helpful.
Exactly. Think of it like you're renovating a house.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just tear down all the walls and call it a day, right?
Yeah.
You'd have a plan for what you want to build in that space, how you want to use it.
I love that analogy. Okay, so in the context of unlearning, how do we actually go about that rebuilding process?
Well, Henry's story gives us some pretty good clues. He starts by seeking out new experiences. things that challenge his assumptions and kind of push him out of his comfort zone. He picks up new hobbies, reads books about stuff he's never even thought about before. He even starts traveling to new places and immersing himself in different cultures.
So it's like he's intentionally putting himself in situations where he's exposed to different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And this is something we can all do, no matter what our circumstances are. Maybe it's finally signing up for that pottery class you've always been curious about, or volunteering in your community and meeting people from all walks of life. It's about actively looking for experiences that shake up our routine thinking and force us to expand our worldview.
So unlearning becomes this ongoing adventure, a way to constantly challenge our perspectives and grow as people.
You got it. And the coolest thing about this whole journey is that it never really ends. There's always something new to discover, something new to unlearn and relearn.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into the school of unlearning, I think the big question for our listener is, where do I even begin?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, I think the most important takeaway from Henry's story is the power of just starting. Just start by noticing those moments when you feel stuck, when you're reacting in ways that aren't really serving you anymore. And then ask yourself, what's the belief or the assumption that's driving this reaction? And just be open to the possibility that it might be time to let go.
It's about becoming more aware of our own internal dialogue, that constant stream of thoughts and beliefs that shape our reality.
Exactly. And remember, unlearning isn't about trying to erase who you are. It's about creating the space for a more expansive, more authentic you to emerge.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, constantly evolving and growing. And sometimes that growth means letting go of what we thought we knew to make room for something even better.
Perfectly said.
So to everyone listening out there, if you only take away one thing from this whole conversation, let it be this. Embrace the power of unlearning, challenge your assumptions, seek out new perspectives, and never ever stop exploring that vast and always changing landscape of your own mind. You might just be amazed by what you find.